the little girl stood on the cold sidewalk, shivering as the evening breeze cut through her thin, tattered dress. Her small hands clutched her empty stomach, and her wide, hopeful eyes scanned the faces passing by. People walked past her without a second glance, too preoccupied with their own lives to notice the hunger in her eyes. Then she saw him. A man stepped out of a sleek black car, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit, his gold watch gleaming under the streetlights. He was the kind of man people admired, respected, even feared. A self-made millionaire, known for his ruthless business strategies and his ability to turn anything into profit. But to the little girl, he was simply another person who might help her. Summoning all the courage her tiny body could hold, she took a deep breath and stepped toward him. "Sir, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the city's hum. "I'm so hungry. Just a plate of food." The millionaire paused for the briefest of moments, his eyes flickering toward her. For a second, it almost seemed like he was about to say something, but then, without a word, he turned away. The girl's heart sank as she watched him walk into the luxurious restaurant ahead. The warm golden light from inside spilled onto the pavement, the delicious aroma of food drifting into the air. Her stomach growled painfully, but she knew she wouldn't be eating tonight. She lowered her gaze, stepping back into the shadows as the world continued to move around her, fast and indifferent. Inside the restaurant, the millionaire barely gave the encounter a second thought. His mind was occupied with business deals, investments, and the expensive meal in front of him. To him, she was just another child on the street, another hand reaching out, another problem that wasn't his to solve. Days passed. The little girl's face faded from his memory, lost in the blur of meetings, contracts, and luxury. But fate has a way of bringing back the things we try to ignore. And soon, he would come to regret the moment he turned his back on that starving little girl. The millionaire had long forgotten about the little girl. His world was too fast, too big, too busy for such things. He was always on the move. Meetings, investments, high-stake deals. To him, success wasn't about emotions or kindness. It was about numbers, power, and control. He had built his empire from nothing, clawing his way to the top with sheer determination. He didn't believe in handouts. In his mind, everyone had to fight for their place in the world, just like he had. But fate doesn't forget. One evening, he was heading home after a long day. His driver navigated through the dimly lit streets, past alleys and old buildings that stood in contrast to the luxury he was used to. He wasn't paying much attention. His eyes were fixed on his phone, scrolling through stock updates and business emails. But then, something unusual caught his attention. A small crowd had gathered near a corner store. Their murmurs, their hushed voices. It was enough to make him glance up. He wasn't the type to be curious about street commotions, but something about the tension in the air made him shift in his seat. "Stop the car," he said. The driver hesitated, but obeyed. Stepping out, the millionaire adjusted his suit and walked toward the small gathering. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was boredom. Or maybe, deep down, something was pulling him there. As he approached, he saw a group of people standing around a frail, motionless figure on the ground. A girl. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. She was barely recognizable, her face pale, her tiny body curled up as if trying to shield itself from the world. A few people whispered among themselves. Others stood in silence. No one knew what to do. "She's been here for days," someone muttered. "She's just a child. No family, no food." The words stung in a way the millionaire didn't expect. He took a step closer, his heartbeat oddly uneven, and then, her face, he saw it clearly. The same little girl from that night, the one who had looked up at him with desperate eyes, asking for just a plate of food. A strange cold sensation spread through his chest. The last time he had seen her, she had been standing, begging, pleading. Now she lay on the hard pavement, too weak to even lift her head. For the first time in a long time, he felt something unfamiliar, guilt. He could still walk away. That was what his old self would have done. It wasn't his problem, wasn't his responsibility, but something inside him refused to let him turn his back again. Before he knew it, he was kneeling beside her. "She needs help," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. Someone in the crowd nodded, but no one moved. Annoyed, he reached for his phone. "Call an ambulance," he ordered his driver. The driver hesitated, confused. It wasn't like him to care, but something in the millionaire's voice made it clear. This time, it was different. Minutes felt like hours. The girl's breathing was shallow, her body barely responding. The millionaire found himself watching her closely, noticing things he hadn't before. The bruises on her arms, the way her fingers twitched slightly, as if she was trying to hold on. Why hadn't he helped her that night? Why had he turned away so easily? When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics moved quickly. They lifted her gently, placing an oxygen mask over her face. As they worked, one of them looked at the millionaire. "Do you know her?" He opened his mouth but hesitated. He didn't know her. Not really. But at that moment, it didn't feel right to say no. "Yes," he said. "Take care of her." He had never said those words before. Not to anyone. The paramedics nodded, loading her into the ambulance. As the doors closed, something inside him shifted. This wasn't over, and for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about stocks, profits, or his next business move. He was thinking about a little girl and how different things could have been if he had just said yes to a simple plate of food. The millionaire sat in his car, watching the ambulance disappear down the street. A strange heaviness sat in his chest. Something unfamiliar, yet unshakable. He had spent years making decisions that only benefited himself, building walls around his heart, convincing himself that kindness was weakness. But now, as the city lights blurred outside the window, he couldn't stop thinking about that little girl, about how close she had come to being just another forgotten face on the streets. That night, he couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, the image of her frail body haunting him. He had money, more than he could ever spend in a lifetime. Yet he had let a child go hungry right in front of him. What was the point of all his success if he had become the kind of person who could ignore something like that? The next morning, he made a decision, one that shocked even himself. He asked his assistant to track down the girl's condition. It didn't take long. She was in the hospital, recovering slowly but still weak. Malnutrition, exhaustion, things that could have been prevented if he, had helped sooner. When he arrived at the hospital, the doctor gave him a curious look. "Are you family?" The question caught him off guard. He had spent his life alone, keeping people at a distance. He wasn't family, but he also couldn't walk away. "I just want to help," he said. The doctor nodded and led him to her room. She looked even smaller in the hospital bed, her face pale, her breathing steady but weak. Sitting beside her was a nurse, adjusting the IV drip. "She's been asking for someone," the nurse said softly. His brows furrowed. "Who?" The nurse gave him a small, knowing smile. "A man in a suit." His breath caught for a moment. She remembered. Tentatively, he stepped closer. Her eyes fluttered open slightly, weak but searching. When they landed on him, there was no anger, No blame, just surprise. And something else he couldn't quite place. You came, she whispered. He swallowed the lump in his throat. I should have come sooner, she blinked, as if trying to process his words. Then, to his utter shock, she gave him the smallest, faintest smile. For the first time in a long time, the millionaire felt something shift inside him. Something real. Over the next few weeks, he made sure she got the best care. He visited her every day, bringing food, books, and sometimes just sitting quietly while she rested. Slowly she got stronger. Slowly he changed. One evening, as she sat up in bed, eating a warm meal he had brought, she looked at him and asked, "Why are you helping me now?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Because I should have helped you then." She nodded, as if she understood more than she should, for someone so young. Then, she did something that completely broke him. She reached out and took his hand. It was small, fragile, but warm. A simple touch, yet it shattered every wall he had built around himself. That night, he made another decision. He didn't just want to help her. He wanted to change, really change. So he did. He set up a foundation to help children living on the streets, ensuring that no child would have to beg for a plate of food like she had. He used his wealth not just for profit, but for purpose. And, for the first time, he felt something deeper than success. He felt peace. Months later, as the little girl stood beside him, healthier, happier, her hand still in his, she looked up at him and said, "Thank you." And for the first time in his life, the millionaire realized that no amount of money could ever buy the feeling he had in that moment. Because sometimes, the greatest success isn't in what we build for ourselves, but in what we do for others.